In life, there's much that seems uncertain to us. Concerning death, however, there can be no doubt. An old saying in Irish tradition has it that there's no herb or cure for death, and true as this may be, there are in our traditions and customs a multitude of structures, of rituals, of practices and beliefs drawn on by the community in order to come to terms with the death of a loved one and to see them safely pass over to the other side. You're very welcome to episode 33 of Blúiríní Béaloidis, the podcast from the National Folklore Collection, University College Dublin. For this episode, I was honoured to have been able to spend some time with David McGowan, a funeral director and embalmer with a lifetime of experience in the death care profession. David is a proud Sligo native and is the owner and operator at Foley and McGowan Funeral Home Sligo and McGowan's Funeral Home Ballina. He's owner and lecturer at the Irish College of Funeral Directing and Embalming and the Death Care Academy located in Collooney, County Sligo, and he studied embalming and funeral directing at Worsham College of Mortuary Science in Chicago in the USA. In 2019, David and his work was the subject of a profoundly life-affirming and deeply moving documentary film called The Funeral Director, and this film was aired on Ireland's national broadcaster RTE, and it's won several awards to date. I've left a link to the documentary in the description for this episode, and I strongly advise all listening to go and watch it. A quick word before we start. Throughout this episode, you'll hear a selection of audio material recorded as part of fieldwork collections housed at the National Folklore Collection, University College Dublin. For information regarding these pieces, so recording dates, names of individuals speaking and so on, please see the description for the episode where I've left a time code along with tape references and more information regarding the pieces. I'd like to thank David for being so generous with his time and sitting to talk with me, and also I'd like to thank the group Líadan, who kindly have allowed me to play their beautiful rendition of the lament Amhrán Mhuínse at the close of this episode. I've left a link to their website in the description for the episode where you can go and support their work. David, you're welcome to Blúiríní. Death is chaos. Death is total chaos, and it's thrust upon us. It turns our world upside down and inside out. And you work in that world. You and your colleagues, you step into that world and you guide bereaved families through a process about which, naturally enough, most of us have little to no idea. And I wonder, just to start, if you could briefly tell us what it is that you do as a funeral director.
Okay, you could describe it in several different ways, and the word funeral director is a bit of a misnomer. You know, there's so many aspects to it. There's the deceased part of it, and there's the preparation of the body after death. Now, I use the word death, but the last decade, I'm almost avoiding using that word. I don't believe in death. I don't believe we die. Death does send shockwaves around the system, and but to be honest, I believe I'm using the word passing because I think that's the proper thing. That's my opinion. I think we pass on to another place. Whether that place is a better place or not, I don't know. I believe it is. So I rarely use the word death now. As much as possible, I'll avoid that. So when the person passes on, there's a process that happens. Anything that's starved of oxygen will pass on. And the human being is no different than the trees, the flowers, anything you know that's starved of oxygen. And there's a process there that returns us back to where we come from. Now, that process can be forestalled or delayed. In the 70s and 80s, it was possible to have a funeral continue for 3 to 4 days without seeing any signs of this process happening. We came into the industry in 1974. By 1978, we've seen a change. We've seen it change the way the deceased that had passed on was changing visually. And we knew something had to be done. And the last life experience that I remember of that awful time was us having to be recalled back to a house where there was a wake for that person. And we had to leave the coffin outside of the door for the comfort of the people attending. because the changes were so rapid. Now that would be about 77, 78.
Yeah.
And that process started to increase. And I remember my father and myself went up and laid an old lady out up the country at 10 o'clock in the morning. At 11 o'clock that evening, the family arrived down at my father's door and said something needs to be done. There was a lot of changes happening. He had no idea what to do, so he advised them go up to the doctor.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, that was his answer to them. Go up to Dr. McSharry. Because, like most funeral directors at the time, they weren't qualified, they weren't trained. It was like a business attached to several other businesses.
In the town, in the community.
And there was a reason for that. But we can talk about that later. I can explain why the funeral businesses were attached to auctioneers and, where you'd be buying fuel, and shopkeepers and post offices was a big one. There's a reason for it in rural Ireland. But these changes, getting back to the first question, if I can get around. See, you could talk forever about this.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to answer your question and hope somebody will understand what I'm saying. The process of preparing a person today is very important. There's a process called embalming. Now, embalming itself is a misnomer, right? But it's a name that's tagged to what we do. Now, I don't know why that was done, because we do nothing like embalming. If you Google or look it up, it'll refer to mummification. It'll refer to Egyptians and what the Egyptians. There is no family in rural Ireland that wants that procedure carried out to their loved one. But I've tried to get the name changed in Europe, and they've all come back to me and said, well, what would you put it to? I said, it's a hygienic treatment. The process is not taking the insides of the body out or the organs. What it is, and I try to explain it to the lay person, the person that's not used, is if people haven't been on a drip themselves, they probably know somebody that has been. It's a bag of fluid suspended at your bedside. There's a needle inserted into your vascular system, and it's left there till you make a full recovery. The procedure for the so-called embalming is something similar. So you don't be opening up the body fully and removing organs and stuff like that. So that's how simple the procedure is. It's injecting a saline solution, a clear solution, with other chemicals in it that affect the protein in the cell. Now, it doesn't eliminate decomposition. It would be impossible to go against nature. You just cannot. It cannot be done. Like, there's trillions of cells in your body, and in order to mummify something, you need to get that fluid to every single cell, which is an impossibility, especially when your vascular system. So we make this injection. So really, it's a temporary preservation. What you do is you slow down the decomposition process until such time as the funeral is over. But it eventually will kick in. Because how do I know that? I've exhumed bodies after 2 to 3 years for different reasons. And I have been exposed to people who they say were embalmed and they were partially a skeleton. So the process is a temporary process. Now that's the preparation of the body, because those changes that occur to a body after they pass away aren't very nice. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's like everything else. Anything starved of oxygen will die. When you're dying, you will have when that area is being starved of that oxygen, it changes colour. There's not the nicest smell of it. Like if you bring a piece of meat and leave it on your table for a couple of days, you'll see no changes in it. But maybe after the 4th day, you'll see it discolouring. And then maybe after the 5th day, you go, there's a smell in here. You can't see the gases because they've gone into the atmosphere. But if that piece of mass was within an intestine, like a balloon, that balloon will swell and swell and swell because the gas that's coming from the process, the decaying process, can't escape. So then it starts to get bigger. And that's when something starts to get bigger in your body, it puts pressure on other organs that contain fluid, like the stomach. And once that pressure is applied to the stomach area, the fluid or the contents in that organ will actually follow the same route as it did to come in, which means you will have fluids evacuating and hemorrhaging from the deceased. Now, I've seen that happen. Before the hygienic treatment that we call embalming became popular, let's say in the early 80s, in rural Ireland, I've gone out to houses where the daughters would be looking at their watches, waiting for me to come. I'd be called by other undertakers. And I often seen, on front of my eyes, those two girls sitting at the head of the coffin with a towel in their hand, taking turns, weeping the evacuation. So something had to be done to protect our culture. Now, some people say to me, why? Why did this not happen so much in the 60s or the early 70s? Now, there was no research ever done to it, but from a practical person working on the ground, it coincides with the introduction of modern medication like morphine and cortisone and
modern medicine.
Yeah. So I think what happened there is, where it would normally take a person 3 days after they passed away to show signs of this process, those signs now were appearing 4 hours after they passed. So something needed to be done. So one person often said to me, an old funeral director over in the mountain, why did this never happen before? What's gone wrong? What are we eating? What are we taking? You know, people would ask you that question. And I remember being confused at the time myself. But I did over the years then research it a bit. And it falls in with what I just told you.
But I heard tell of a yarn about a poor man that died. He had pains.
Yes.
And he was sitting up, like he died in the chair. That time there was no hospitals or places. He died, he was all crippled up. So when they were labelling him out, didn't they come on and they tied him down, of course, on a table, tied him down level. And this good boy was at the end, and about 5 o'clock in the morning, there was, of course, at that time there used to be plenty of porter and whisky, the old custom that time, it used to be. But there was 5 or 6 lads then at the fire. They were all nearly gone unless 5 or 6 lads that were then. And what did he do you think, this fella? Well, he went over and didn't he cut the cord?
Oh.
And up sits the man. And of course, what did he do? He said, you only put a pipe in his mouth. They used to clay pipes that time at the clay pipes, you get a clay pipe and what, you go round about all the places.
Yes, at the wakes.
Put up at the wakes, yes. But he put the pipe in his mouth. I'm sure he made some noise, but they looked at them. When they saw him, so they'd like to kill one another going for the dough. Well, it was a terrible, wasn't it? A terrible left to see him sitting up, and the pipe in his mouth.
Well, would the corpse be laid out on the bed?
Oh, left out there on the bed. But they wouldn't leave it out there was feathers,
Yes.
ticks that time down, you see. Well, they generally have a board or a door and leave it down, you see. They'll never leave them out on because they wouldn't stiffen. Don't you see, you want to stiffen that, it should be very hard to put you in the coffin. Because when I'd rise a man with the feet and another man with the head, don't you see, he'd been down in two and they'd be falling from us. They'd never stiffen on a feather bed, don't you see, you'd always put a board under them and very light covering over them. Or you stiffen up.
But the important thing here is, and one must not forget when you talk about someone's passing, I'm using the word pass now again, and I'll tell you why a little bit more down the road. The family are only interested. Our culture, ritual and traditions is to hold on to the body as long as possible, and as quick after they pass, the better, when they're in their turmoil of grief. Now, what one must remember, and I've been a great believer in this, the passing of somebody's loved one is the greatest human experience of loss that any human will have experienced in their lifetime. There's no other loss that I can think can replace that. When you lose your loved one, you can never talk to them, touch them, kiss them, argue with them, fight with them. It's a big void in your life. But then there's communities that'll miss that person as well. And this is when I'm explaining about our culture, ritual, and tradition to other cultures. They find it hard why we spend so much time with the body. And when I was in Chicago and working, they'd all say, oh, sure, you only have a wake for the party because you're great party people. Any excuse. And I took an insult to that because I had a bit of knowledge of the therapeutic reasons why we sit up and spend time with the deceased. Yes, I would say to them, there was music, song and dance. But you must remember, you turned the wheel back then. There were no radios, there were no discos, there were no restaurants, there were nothing like that. The only social outlet they had was going to each other's houses and listen to storytelling, song and dance. And they were referred to as rambling houses. So you would get into a deep rural area and you would meet people walking the roads and you'd be told, I just left Johnny Tom's house. Mary Riley is above flat out singing. Well, we just left Sonny Riley's house and your man there, Tommy Joe, has the box out and he's playing like hell. So, but what they did was they carried the story of the village from one house to another. And that's how the news went round. There was no Google, there was no internet, there was no papers, there was no dance halls, there was no restaurants. This is how. So they rambled the roads. Like the old saying one time was, I've an old rambling cow, because you go into every field in the place. So that's what they did. They walked the road. When a citizen of that parish passed away, Tommy Riley would be sent for because he loved Tommy Riley playing the Bucks of Oranmore. When he would go in and take that accordion out of his box, and after the first 5 or 6 notes he played, everybody in the room knew that the man in the coffin, or the woman, loved to hear him play. And that would shed a tear from every grown, haired man standing in the room.
Yeah.
So that was our therapy release for grief is shedding tears. It's one of our mechanisms that's within our body that helps us over the whole. And when I heard those people abroad not understanding the wake, so I met a psychologist one time that wrote a couple of books on grief, and they mentioned the Irish wake, referred to it on a few occasions. And again, drink was mentioned. Now, I went and spoke to that person afterwards in Boston, and I asked them, why do you keep referring to it as a drunken party? Do you really understand what a wake is? You know, it's a vigil. People spend time. You will not be allowed to leave that remains. Somebody will sit up with that person. Yes, there is music and there's song, and yes, there is food for the comfort of the people attending the wake. It's like an offering that you'll be fed if you come. Yeah, I'm sure it was on a few occasions. It was overdone maybe a bit, but it was very therapeutic. But in order to do that, you must have an open coffin.
To see the body.
Yeah, because again, I had this argument with psychologists and different cultures, like for instance, England. Viewing of the body or spending time with them isn't as important to them as it is the Irish. But I have talked to a lot of people, like everybody knows, if somebody passes away in the UK, it could be 2 weeks before they're buried.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of reasons for that, and I researched that. A lot of it, believe it or not, is down to administration. You must have a death registered there. You must have be cleared, and they work 9 to 5, Monday to 12 o'clock on a Friday. So if somebody dies on a Friday, you mightn't get to the coroner's office till Monday or Tuesday, right? But it's not seen as a great urgency. So people are left to a couple of weeks, but there's no demand to get the body from the family. They accept this is how it's done. But like in Ireland, when you get a call that somebody has passed away, before you get into your arrangements, it's like, when can we have mum back at the house?
Yeah.
So that's the difference. So that's why it's so important. But to get to that question, to give you a bit of an explanation, the psychologists that wrote about the cultures there are now saying, why do the Irish grieve better than anybody else in the world? The wake, the spending time with the body.
Why don't you go on to the sadder end of life, both wakes and funerals?
Yes.
I mean, there was a lot of superstitions and traditions attached to wakes, wasn't there?
Yes, there was, yes. Couldn't come home alone.
You wouldn't be allowed home alone at all?
No.
I see, yes.
Couldn't. You weren't supposed to come home alone from a wake at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, who would lay out the corpse at that time when a person died?
The people that had been living in the house with them and the neighbours.
The neighbours. There were no particular people like that were supposed to be
Well,
handy.
there might be a handy woman in the village. Usually there was one particular good neighbour,
Yeah.
And that one would be called upon for every sad occasion. Because you'll always find one person more generous than another in charity or other things, you see. So that one would be always called upon, all right.
Mm-hmm.
It would be surely the one or two people in one village that would do all that.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, where would they lay out the corpse then? In the old days now?
Yes, in the coffin. And if it were the head of the house, his head would go towards the back door.
Oh.
And his feet towards the front. But if it was one of the family, they would go by the window, the front window.
Oh, I see. Or the mother, if it was the mother, how would she be?
No, I couldn't tell you about the mother. But I'd imagine the mother would go to the back door. She'd be one of the heads of the house, I'd say she would, because I remember my grandmother, the Lord of Mercy, she was put at the back door. And I remember the women to say, well, where will we put her? To my father, the Lord of Mercy. And he says, well, she's the head of the house. He says, put her, he says, to the back door. And they did. And then when they put them up on a table, they used to put them.
Oh, on the table?
On a table, yes.
In the coffin?
No, not at all. Covered with a sheet or... No, the habit. They'd have the habit on them, on a table.
But, a table would hardly be long enough.
But they can put another onto it.
Oh, I see, yes. And
there was one table in our village that used to go into every house.
Oh, I see.
They had a long table, and that served every house in the village. Now do you see, that table would be borrowed for the occasion.
I see, and they covered the table then with
but up over the corpse all that would be in white sheets, and done up beautiful, white lace coming down out of them. You could see nothing but white over the side of the corpse. And the corpse would be laid on a table, as I told you, with the habit. And then when they would have the corpse laid out, they'd start and they'd have a fine round of crying over that corpse immediately.
I see. Well, were there special criers?
No, not in my time. It was genuine crying.
It was genuine. Did they have any words when crying?
They had a couple of words of their own, you know, yes. A couple of words of their own, yes.
What were they? The sort of would they used to sort of speak to the corpse? Like would they talk to the corpse or anything?
Well, they would. They'd speak to them in their own name, you know.
I see.
In that kind of way, yes.
Did you do it yourself? I mean, I always look upon this as if it was the kind of thing that was being done, that you didn't have to cry really, but you just assisted people. Was that right? I mean, it's all right with your near relatives. Certainly, you would cry.
Yes.
I mean, naturally.
Yes.
But if somebody else in the village died, that's, well...
Yes, that is true. They used to all assist each other. I saw that.
Yeah.
I saw that done.
Yeah.
I saw that done in an uncle's house of mine. And when one would go to the corpse to cry, all the well-wishers would come along and help out along. Yeah. That's true.
Whether they were sincere about it or not.
Whether they were sincere about it or not is to be questioned.
Yeah.
That is true. I saw that all right. They would all come and have a chorus.
I see.
Yes, that is true.
Ho 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 no, ho 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 no, Gobra agus gujo, is oh ho no, is oh ho no, gujo imagine.
Abriminish, bech an kulfin corp fe chlor, hagach na mnaga leid sanna bech sa tig timpel ed a garp. Agus fyddi sio bech laig mecht agus gagus os nod is all gonos mogras befjan dyn rebus momas a yinish tas go khayne nishan to me a beto gedi na gloy a beg weg nus at yeg gambale Snein is a tort size tuedim dit an rod a cholsa
spending time with the body. But in order to do that, you agree that that's healthy, you agree that that's good, you agree you're helping out the people in the worst time of their life, well then it must be important also that the person that has passed away looks as close to themselves, well dressed and in a comfortable position in the coffin. So that's that part of the process. The rest of the second part of the process is funeral directing. And really, and I don't want to insult anybody, but that part of it is just no different than an event manager. You organise a time to be there, you provide the vehicles to do that. You organise obituaries and papers, you organise music and you organise church. Now, in gone by days, people did that themselves. But you won't have a death. I did a bit of research. It's about 1 in 11 years within a family unit that you'll have a death closely associated. Okay, so you're not used to making funeral arrangements.
No
So
evidence.
what you do is you go down to some person that's used to doing it, and they call them funeral directors, because they're doing it weekly. So they know who to ring to get a grave dug. They know who to ring to get flowers. They know who to ring to get music. They know who to, because they're doing it. So that's the funeral directing aspect. So there's two parts to it. There's the preparation of the person that has passed away, so we can allow the family spend some time with the person that has passed in a comfortable environment, where there are not two daughters sitting at the head of the coffin with two towels wiping, and the hemorrhage that's caused by the whole process. And when the process is explained to people, they don't seem to see it as too bad then when it's explained to them, because it has never been explained properly to people, the procedure. And because the name of embalming is given to it, you can understand why people would go, no, I don't want that. I don't want that done.
Yeah.
Nobody will ever come to I do tell my students, nobody will ever come to your funeral door and knock on your door and say, my mother has passed away, I want her mummified. It ain't going to happen. They're not a bit interested in that. But we do want mummy looking well.
Yeah.
So whatever you do, do it, because she deserves it. So there's the two parts. And that you asked me, I'm in the funeral business, and you asked me there before we start to explain what I do. That's exactly what I do. I prepare the deceased after they pass, and I become an event manager for the other portion of it. Not everybody can do both. I do both. Not every funeral director does both. He will employ the services of an embalmer to come in and do that. That's what they call themselves, embalmers. I tried to change the name at a meeting in Dublin one time. I was lucky to get out the door with my life. Two fellas came out to me, you said I'm not an embalmer. I said, no, you're not. I never seen a fella embalmed in my life. I never seen one. And I don't know anybody that has ever embalmed. I do. Are you kidding me? You know, they got annoyed because...
It's their life. It's a threat, perceived
but I think they like the name, that I'm a special person in the community, like. You know, you walk into the pub tonight, you'll see 4 hairdressers, you'll see 5 plumbers, you'll see 6 electricians. You won't see too many embalmers. I don't know, it's just like... But I wish there would, and there will come a day, because young kids now are studying biology and science. And someday a funeral director will go into a house and he'll say, and now I must take your mum away to be embalmed. And they'll challenge him on that. They'll say,
that's not what's happening.
That's not what's happening. You know. So that's what I do day in, day out. And I teach the process as well.
You were, before we started this even, you'd mentioned something that I've come across in the Folklore archive, and a lot of the material, it describes the practicalities before the hygienic process that we refer to as embalming, that you mentioned, when it was done in the community, by the community, and there's this idea of, you mentioned like musicians and singers come to the wake house, but also there's a coming together of the community, because obviously, you know, the family, the loved ones are in a state of absolute shock and turmoil, and everything's inside out and upside down. But things like the body needs to be prepared, and often it was the tradition that the women used to wash and shave the corpse. Was that? Did you hear of that?
Yeah. In 1974, when my father took over the business, I seen plenty of that at that time, and it would be we would get the call, somebody has passed away, and the first thing my father said is, as the priest, did you call the priest, and did you go up to the post office to give the death notice? So
these were the first things.
That was the thing, yeah. So you wouldn't move a person out of a house unless they were anointed by the
extra unction was the
yeah. And
okay.
They'd be the first questions that they'd be asked, right? And then about 6 men would come in, and we had a bar in the village, because most funeral businesses were attached to pubs and shops, because they had food and they had beer and drink. They had all the stuff in one place. It was like a one-stop shop.
The requirements
for the wake, and he had a hearse. So I remember standing back at one stage. We don't do anything with the preparation of the body. We do very little with the acknowledgements. We don't do anything with music. So basically, we're dead people, taxi drivers. We bring them from one place because when we arrive out of the house, all the women would be in the house cleaning. And I remember a thing in the pub, when I go back to the pub when the job was done. Now, before I go there, the women at the parish would be in doing all the cleaning and the washing of the body. The men would congregate out in the garden, smoking their pipes and whatever. And then when it was time, they'd hop on their bicycles and hit for the funeral director, the pub or the shop. And as I said to you, it was a thirsty job. So there were a lot of offers to go and pick the coffin. But that was a tough job. It wasn't a woman's job. But I remember they'd arrive into the bar, and before they'd ever pick a coffin, like there'd be about 3 rounds of drink got at this stage. And the publican, of course, or the funeral director, would stand them, the first one. That was the word. I'm standing ye this drink. I don't know where the word stand came from, but that was the word that was used in our pub. So there'd be about 4 rounds of drinks, stood before the coffin would be picked. It was like a big ordeal. So then we would let them into a shed out at the back of the house, pub, and they'd pick a coffin, and they'd be choosing. Normally, it would be an oak coffin, because in rural Ireland it was, if you weren't buried in an oak coffin, you weren't buried decent. That's the way it was looked upon. If you weren't buried in an oak coffin, you were a pauper. That was the way they were looked at. And some villages, it have to be a casket. But it was all about keeping up with the Joneses. As Mrs. Riley was buried in a casket, we can't be buried, and Mrs. Thompson can't be buried any less. And that was basically it. I heard those words being said. We would come back up and there'd be another drink got. And we would have a list from one of the relatives of 6 pound of ham, 12 loaves, 30 glasses, 20 stools, bread, 3 bottles of Powers, 3 bottles of scotch, a bottle of port wine for the women, and 3 big large bottles of lemonade, 3 cases of Harp, 3 cases of Guinness, 3 cases of Smithwick's. It was a trailer you need behind there.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
Was tobacco a thing then as well?
Oh yeah.
That was the big...
Yeah. 200 Major, 200 Carls and 200 Gold Leaf. Yeah. So that would always, and that would be the order nearly on every funeral.
Yes.
So how many people went for the burying things?
Well, generally 3.
3 men, was it?
Yes. And 3 went to make the grave.
Was it always men, was it? Was it always men went for the
Oh, it was always men that went for the burying things.
And did it go on a horse and cart? Horse and cart?
Horse and cart, or an ass and cart, or anything like that.
Where did they go from here? Was it at Lone or?
Oh, they used to go over there to Lake Harrod and we get what they'd want there.
Yes, so.
They used to...
Who had a pub there?
Well, Barty O'Brien had it there. But up to very lately, they used to go and get the boards the same day for making the coffin.
Who would they get them?
Well, they got them there in Lake Harrod too.
Yes, so.
There was a man named Handley around here, Boss Handley they used to call him. He was a great carpenter. You'd pay about 6 bob for all the boards that would make the coffin. And he was very fond of a drop of liquor too, the poor old boss. And if he wanted to be dead, he'd land and start to go from the barn or someplace and begin to make the coffin. Every 4 or 5 minutes, don't you see, he'd get a glass of dry and he'd come in with his tape and he'd measure the person that was dead, It wasn't necessary at all. But he knew well when he'd come in that he was sure to get a glass.
And there would be tobacco and pipes. I saw 4 gross of pipes coming into our house with one funeral.
Clay pipes.
Yes. And I don't know how many pounds of tobacco. Oh, maybe 20. And there would be a few of the neighbours out in the barn with this tobacco and pipes, filling the pipes and sending them in.
I see.
And everybody would get a pipe and filled with tobacco.
You used to say anything when they get the pipe?
Oh, definitely. The Lord have mercy on the dead. Straight away. Yes.
Had any other prayer with that, I wonder? Did they have any other prayer besides saying the Lord have mercy on the dead? Did they add any other bit to it at all?
I suppose they did.
Some of the old people perhaps.
I suppose they did, but it kind of winning in my time a bit, you know.
I suppose it was
Yes,
going out.
yes, but I saw that much. Yes.
Well, that's the tradition that they used to have them waking longer. And there'd be snuff, a little saucer of snuff and tobacco. If it was a man, it'd be tobacco. A woman, it'd be snuff and tobacco and pipes. And the people that go in to wake them, there'd be a house would be full of lads and at a wake. Lads used to go to the wake and they'd play all sorts of gamble,
That's right.
play cards and sing. There'd be a beer going round, just like a public house, candles burning. There was different. Now they wake them in their bed.
That's right.
So put a white quilt over them, and in bed the same as if they were sleeping. There's no wakes now. They're not allowed to go to wakes except in the daytime. They brought to the chapel now the next night, the day.
Oh, yes, indeed. Things have changed an awful lot since then.
They've changed. It was long ago.
But then the question we would ask then is the body laid out yet? Yeah, the women were there when we left. So if you're out about 5 o'clock, so we'd arrive at 5 o'clock and the person would be on the bed, all washed and whatever. And then when we come back to the pub would be full and the neighbours in the community would be drinking in the pub and they'd have heard of the death because bad news travels fast and they'd all know within the community. But the several words that would come in, is she overboard yet? Is he overboard? I never knew what that meant, overboard. But that would be the word that would be there. Is Mrs. Riley over? I heard Mrs. Riley is dead, yeah. Or Tom Riley, or Tom Down, whatever his name, whoever it be. Yeah, is he overboard yet? Overboard meant...
Literally
No. Yeah, well, the reason that that's the question, don't go near the house when the women will be cleaning.
Yeah.
Because you'd be told, get out of the way. There'd be no comfort. Because you sit down at a wake and you tell a story about the person. I heard one fella say one time, and he was a great man to drive a Massey Ferguson. They'd come up with things like on the body, but you wouldn't get that if the women were still doing the cleaning. You'd be told, stand outside and look, we're busy here. Everybody wants to seem busy. Now, the overboard came that they were coffined and the wake had started.
Yeah.
Right? Now, where I think it came from was to be placed on a board to do the preparation. To usually take down the door or something like that. It'd be put on 2 barrels and you'd lay the corpse out and you'd wash them there. And that was the word is the person overboard? Were they over on the board yet? I think.
Yeah.
And somebody else in my research, an old man told me it was over the board of the coffin. Overboard was into the box.
Yeah.
You weren't outside the box. Now, which two is right, I don't know. They came from 2 different people.
I handled the corpse myself. I didn't wash them. But it didn't chill me to the bones and lift the corpse up. I had the experience of 2 women dressed a woman. And they took her onto the floor to dress out the bed and clean sheets. Now they wanted her up off the floor, back on the bed. Well, it didn't upset me.
You had to help.
To lift the woman, the cold corpse, off the floor onto the bed. But I didn't do it professionally.
I know.
See, not everyone could handle a cold corpse.
It wasn't a professional job.
No. A neighbour that was used to handling sick children, dying women, dying men. And it didn't upset her nerves or her stomach to handle a corpse.
But there's special whiskey for her then.
No, again, she accepted that as an act of charity. She was doing something that you or I might go and visit sick people in hospital.
I know.
It was an act of charity. She thought.
But was there not a special glass laid aside for her?
No. Mrs. Jones, our suppositions say, Mrs. Jones will get their corpse ready. But Mrs. Jones would be getting buried herself next week. It wasn't an accepted profession.
I know.
Nor a job. A neighbour. It was just a neighbourly act.
Yeah.
And the woman that would do it would be kind of used to death.
Yeah.
She wasn't frightened of handling a cold corpse, straightening the legs, putting pennies on the eyes
That's okay.
to close them, you see.
Yeah.
But how about the washing of the corpse and the laying out of the corpse?
Oh, they would, well, it was A woman that was dead. Well, the generated women that you should do it anyway, well, they would wash them.
Who would wash the corpse?
Well, any neighbour or this.
Anybody? Were there special people in the village?
No, there wasn't. Any neighbour, a woman, a friend, they'd be there to do that. They'd leave them out the corpse then, but always washed them.
And it was usually women that did the washing?
Usually women that done it. And of course they fixed up the sheets and all around the corpse.
Where would the sheets be fixed?
Around the bed, you see, at the both ends and in at the wall, but it was left open at the front. And there was a little table then left in the front, and there was candles lit on that.
How many?
6 was the set, wasn't it?
Yes. Well, tell me this, while they were washing, where would they wash the corpse? Where would the corpse be left while they were washing the corpse?
Well, Harry did have a basin of water there in the room or wherever the person had died.
Yes. And the corpse would be washed, where would the corpse be laid while they were washing them?
Well, no, I didn't ever see them washing one in my life.
Would it be...
Probably did.
Would they ever put it down on straw?
Well, no, I never seen any straw going in. Or likely to leave it out on some sort of a mat or something like that. I saw them much washing the douches when you were just rubber and rubber touch, and they wasn't going to water that, put later that way after dying.
Shave the man.
Hmm?
Shave the man.
Oh, they used to shave, if he had beard, they'd shave them. I often shaved the dead man.
Did you?
I did. And mind you, he never said a hairbrush.
Well, did you get the razor then when you shaved?
Well, I got one. It was customary to bring the razor.
And they used to be put in a habit, was often the practice, wasn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
Less, obviously, that's not something you'd see
You
regularly
don't.
now. It's not
I
done anymore.
rarely use them.
Yeah.
Yeah, blue for a woman, brown for a man,
Right.
and white for an atheist.
And did you ever hear, I read in accounts in the manuscripts about the right hand being put into the habit first.
Yeah.
It's important that was put in.
Oh yeah, and if the local clergy in the parish knew that you had a brown habit on a person that wasn't, we'll say, attending mass and things like that, it would be said from the altar. So you had to be very careful and be on your toes what you did and what you presented.
Yeah.
Because you'd be hauled over the coals over it.
Yeah, yeah.
So they were, but in every little parish in rural Ireland had all little differences.
Of course, yeah.
You know, certain cemeteries you wouldn't open a grave on a Monday.
Yeah, but that was common. Why was that?
Because it'd be opened again within 12 months.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And there are 4 parishes that I know that still hold on to that tradition that I serve in. But if you go out on the Sunday and put a spade in it, and as the word they used, turn a sod. Mm-hmm. If you turn a sod on it, it's opened.
Yeah.
So you can't be accused on the Monday then that you disrespected the ritual and the thing. Mm. So that still goes on. Another cemetery, they have to carry them around the outside of the wall once before they actually go into the graveyard.
Yeah, that's a really common one. No shortcut to a graveyard. That was very quite a common tradition.
That's right.
Did you ever see?
The big one is you face the east.
Yeah.
Yeah, that comes from you face the rising sun.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're not facing the rising sun, but then again, the way cemeteries are opened and managed today, they're burying them in every direction.
There's no consideration.
A few old cemeteries still stick to the old
because the altar points east, I think, as well.
Yeah,
it makes not natural.
When I was studying the Muslim tradition, the person faces Mecca. Mm. But we were doing an interment in Sligo Cemetery, and there was an argument about what way. Now, I knew that all the people in Sligo Cemetery were facing the east, or as close to it as possible. So I said to them at that meeting in the cemetery, that's the direction we're going. And they were arguing with me, this, that, and the other. Anyway, they took out their iPhone, they left down it on the ground, and turned down the compass. And sure enough, it was exactly. But the point here is, it was the same direction as we face. Mm, mm-hmm. I thought that was very funny. Yeah. So they just called it something different. Mm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So every tradition and ritual and cultures especially, should be respected.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
But I also know that Irish people would more appreciate what we do.
Oh, yeah.
I don't mean us as funeral, I mean the people. The send-off that we give people after they pass.
It's so important. It's because death is, or when people pass away or loved ones pass on, it's such chaos and turmoil that the more structures we can put in place, symbolic structures we can put in place around that process to put a bit of order on it, to give some boundary to it, the better it is for all of us, you know what I mean?
Well,
and that coming together of community, you're never left alone. A neighbour will be in the house with the body's never left alone. That the community comes together, that there's the idea of, you know, the mahal of people coming in with supplies and things for the wake. It's a huge, even following the casket, the community coming to the graveyard, walking to the graveyard with the casket.
You don't get that now in bigger cities like London and I'd say even Dublin. Like there'd be, you know, our average attendance at a funeral pre-COVID would be 1,000 people and up to 3,000. And when I tell that to people in America and everywhere else, that's the norm for us, they go, why do you do that? I said, that's our culture, that's our ritual. There's a mechanism there, that's a mechanism put in place, and it gives the families, the bereaved, a lot of solace and comfort. And I said, it's probably one of the things that will kickstart the grieving process. Everybody grieves differently, and I'm not going to force my opinion on anybody. I know there are 6 stages there, your acceptance, your from 1 to 6. My opinion on that is it shouldn't be a number thing, because I've seen number 6 coming before number 1.
Coming in a different order, kind of.
Yeah. But I do know people attending funerals and coming and shaking hands and hugging with people and telling a little yarn or a story. I do know that's very therapeutic to a grieving family. I do know. This is a family now that's going to try and get some sort of normality back into their lives when their loved one is gone. There's no more visits, there's no more talking, there's no more whatever. That's a big loss and a big miss. Those are the little mechanisms that are in place that help that family get through that awful time. Yeah. And what I say to families, I'd hear a family often, people coming in, time you'll get, time you'll kill. That's the worst thing you could say to a grieving family, because grief never goes away, in my opinion. Now, I do think you learn to live with it.
Yeah.
I know a woman that's still wearing black clothes after 5 years. And I sat down with her and I had a chat with her. And do you know what she told me? She just told me she doesn't want to lose her grief.
Yeah.
And you know, when she said that to me, I got a bit of a shock. Why would somebody not? But I know.
It's a last letting go, isn't it?
Yes, correct, yeah. She was enjoying her grief, and she felt it was respectful to the person who passed away that I would grieve so long for you.
Yeah.
And then there's the people that won't grieve during the funeral times either. I see that all the time, and I try to advise the people. And they wonder what's wrong with them. And I tell them, I said, you got too involved in the event management of the funeral. You were busy, and you didn't get time. The problem here with you, you're going to grieve on your own without a body. The worst type of grieving that you can get. And it happened myself. I didn't grieve during my father's funeral at all. I was 4 days, and like everybody, I was going, everyone else around me is crying. What the hell is wrong with me?
Yeah.
But I was trying to arrange this, and that. And I used the word, my grief was stolen off me for the during period of the funeral. But my God, one thing I can tell you for sure, nobody escapes it.
No.
Because I was sitting on my own in the house about 6 weeks later, and that house nearly came down on top of me.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's like after the structure, where there's such a regimented rhythm to the structures of the wake and the processes and the ritual. And it's then on a Tuesday afternoon when you're standing in the post office, do you know what I mean? And the crowd has dispersed and gone, and that's when you get hit over the head.
You're on your own.
That, yeah.
Yeah. it's a lot more therapeutic to grieve around the body from a psychological point of view. Because when you see the person, and this is kind of, I had this chat with the English psychologists who were writing about and making fun of the Irish wake and all that. You lock somebody up in a fridge for 2 weeks after they passed away, and there's no access or there's no view into that person. That'll be to administration or whatever the delay is. Okay? The people that's going through the worst loss ever they'll experience in their life doesn't get to see the person. Seeing is believing.
It's not real in a way, yeah.
If you see the person, it'll remind you of so many things. It'll remind you of being brought to the match. It'll remind you of being brought to the mart. It'll remind you of the good times and the bad times. And there's a whole thing. If you don't see, you have the thoughts to accumulate in your head, but there's so many other things pulling at you in your head. You miss the important one. Where if the body is in front of you and you're on their own in the room, you can curse them, you can laugh at them, you can tell them how mad you were, how disappointed you were with them, you can tell them how thankful you were.
Yeah.
If you're looking at them. And again, that's the importance of preparing the deceased. Because if you believe and agree with me on all of those things, you must also agree with me that that person must be laid out properly. To suck you in.
To allow that to happen unimpeded.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things associated with all human cultures is the idea of the existence of a soul, or a kind of an animating force, a spirit that can go and return. And I wonder if you have any comments or
loads. Now we're getting into the nitty gritty of it. Now we're talking about the spirit. Yeah. Well, of course, there has to be a reason for doing everything. Okay? I believe, I do see things at funerals and during the funeral period. You don't spend 40 years in the business without seeing something. Number one, the one thing I totally believe in, and I don't mind saying to people, I told you before, I don't like forcing my opinion on anybody, but one opinion I have, and I stand behind it, and it's for spending so much time among bereaved people and people that have passed away, that the spiritual world is much greater than the one down here. Let you believe that. Because things I've seen, you couldn't say were coincidences. Too many of them. And those little, I won't say rituals, traditions, came from somewhere. Somebody else seen those things. The spirit, people will say that, when you pass away, there's the resemblance of your body there. That's what it is. And that's why it's important to keep it that way for the grieving and the wake, and to maintain it in that. But yet the spirit is there. I believe the spirit is around for a good while after the person passes on. I think there's a big presence. I've experienced a lot of things.
Well, tell me, Ma'am, did you ever hear any stories about people coming back again that have died?
Oh, me and my did.
Did you?
I often heard them hundreds of times.
Is that right? Did you ever hear anything about people who had left a debt, money to pay, that they've come back and tell their friends or relatives to pay the money? Never heard anything like that, did you?
Yeah, I did often hear tell of that.
Did you?
There was a man died up there along the Mullingar Road, with the main road. His name was Smith. And Jack Keegan. They're all dead now.
God bless them.
Jack Keegan worked with him. Arthur Smith was the man's name. He was a big farmer. And he worked with them anyway as a labourer. And he was coming home this night. This man was dead, years dead. But the girl, he used to appeal to him every night. And he went to the priest and he told the priest that there must be something wrong with him. So he got him to, the priest went with him this night and questioned the dead man. And there was a debt owed to some landowner, now like a shop, something like that. He owed a debt and he wanted it to be paid. And would Jack see the man that he owed the money to and see that it'd be paid, or he couldn't go to heaven until it'd be paid. That's all ever I heard. That was told to me when I was only a child. I used to hear them. He wasn't at peace with God until the debt had been paid.
If you're put on purgatory, if you're put in purgatory, well, purgatory is on earth. And the souls is travelling through the earth as thick as the blades of grass is growing in the field. So they are. Well, you can't tell where you're stationed. You know what I mean? You can't tell where you're stationed.
Where you're going to be like.
Where you're put to put in your time in this world before you get released to another place. Well, perhaps All Souls night, my uncle or my aunt or relations could come in here and sit at that fire. You wouldn't see them. Eh?
That's right.
Eh?
That's the Irish belief, all right, that that's the case.
Ah. You see, you could be sitting there at that fire. Well, you wouldn't see it.
That's right.
Well, the idea is put on a nice fire on a clean hearthstone.
Well, do you believe yourself that they do that? That does happen?
Certainly it happens. Certainly.
And you believe, of course, that on All Souls Day they are released for the day.
Released for the day. But you see, the job is, when a person dies, well, you can't tell till you meet the Almighty where you're going to land. You see, you don't know where you're going to land till he gives you the sentence. You don't know where you're going to land till he passes a sentence on you.
Well, then you're
Well, if he turns about and puts you into purgatory, well, you have to spend there so long before you're released. See? You have to spend so long.
Well,
Did you ever hear a ghost of a living person being seen?
I did.
What's this they used to call that? The fetch, I think they used to call it.
My father's seen my
I haven't heard that now around here, like. It wasn't him, it was his fetch, you know, by the way that they appeared, like. Yes, whether they were sick or bad before the day. I often heard of that.
My father saw his brother-in-law, and he was just as near to him. He was at the dying, and beside the fairies brought him to. He was as near to him as that door, and he was his good clothes, and he all dressed up as he was in real life. And he passed as near to my father's that door, and he went on a back over from the house about that lintel out to the little boring up there, and another little boring up to the land, and he disappeared after that.
But he was dead at the time, was
Oh, dead and buried. A good while, a few months or maybe a year, but he was dead and buried at the time. A fine young man. And they said the fairies had something to do with that, all right, but no one could tell. But that was a brother of my mother's. But that happened all right.
Well, I have the girl telling me it's not lies at all. She's dead now. She was high up in the house between this and Manor Hamilton. It was in 1915. Oh, indeed, I was a strong lad at this time. And she says, I was high up in Minor Collins, she says. Me said that 2 servant girls. And Minor came in this evening, it was in 1915, and he had 2 sons at the war, the 1914 war. There were 2 horse soldiers. And he says to this lassie Annie, was her name, he says, my 2 sons, he says, I'm going to chat them the night they're coming back, he says, from the grave, he says. And the 2 horses that they were shot on, he says, it's them they'll be riding. Yes, she says, I near fainted, and I was upstairs in the house. All the houses to be had yet in a good one. But I went upstairs, she says, and I said I'd go to bed. I was trembling with fear. And it was a wonderful bright moonlight night, and the book was laying. There was a big iron gate at the door and a road up from the main road up to the house for the one. She looked out, and here she sees these 2 white horses coming galloping like that up to the gate. And he walked down and he shook hands with the 2 of them. And they chatted for a few minutes and they disappeared like that. And he came in and he says, I was talking to me 2 sons, he says, and it wasn't 12 o'clock. Well, he used to work spiritually. He could talk to the dead.
That the spirit is around for a long time. I also believe the spirit will move away somewhere else now. I don't know where that is. But I do know the spirit will wait around for as long as it needs to. I meet people on the street regularly. And they tip me on the shoulder and say, have you time for a cup of coffee? I'd say, I wouldn't, but I'd make time because I'd know what was coming. So we'd go in and sit down. This regularly would happen now. You told me, when I lost my husband, talk to the spirit if you ever have a problem. Most normal people do have problems in their life. Talk to the spirit. You told me you don't have to go to the church to do it. Best place, I believe, from talking to people is surround yourself with nature. Where there's a wave crashing against a rock, or there's birds or something flying around. It's from talking to people, that's where they got solace and comfort from. And church as well, going to not of all persuasions. And you told me ask for the help. And if you have a problem, a door or a path will open up in front of you that'll solve that within a period of time. And you also told us they won't make you win the lotto. They'll never put you in danger. They'll never put you into anything that'll cause danger. And it mightn't be you the help, it could be your grandson or something. So this, I'd be listening to this regularly. And then you'd have at the end, I had a situation. Tried everything. Will it be within the medical community or wherever they went with their was illness or financial or whatever it was, or grandchildren, whatever problem. Exhausted every effort. Nothing was working. I was putting 2 slices of toast in the toaster the other day. I just thought about what you said, and I said, what the hell? That problem was sorted in 3 months. Now, I get that regularly. Some people might say, just a coincidence they got sorted. It's a coincidence that medical procedure worked. But I don't think so. No, and I think the spiritual world is much greater than the one down here. Whether it's a God or what that's out there, I don't know. But there is some big force. And I reckon the crack is up there.
I'm inclined to agree, yeah. Thanks a million, David. I want to, I suppose, start to bring the conversation to a close. And I really appreciate everything you've shared in your time. I wanted to finish with, there's a piece of music from the group Líadan, a beautiful song called Amhrán Mhuínse. It's a lament in the Irish language. It expresses a dying person's wish to be buried at home amongst their own people. And I want to send Baile Loiscithe le Síle Denver agus grúpa Líadan ar fada soch cad chuirt an piece of kills a shemant. Just want to thank Síle Denver and Líadan, the group, for allowing me to play this beautiful recorded piece of singing and music of theirs. But I just want to read the lyrics of it to people who don't speak the language. If I were 3 leagues out at sea or on mountains far from home, without any living thing near me but the green fern and the heather, the snow being blown down on me and the wind snatching it off again, and I were talking with my fair Tammy, I would not find the night long. Dear Virgin Mary, what will I do? This winter is coming on cold. And dear Virgin Mary, what will this house do and all that are in it? Wasn't it young, my darling, that you went during a grand time, at a time when the cuckoo was playing a tune and every green leaf was growing? If I had my children home with me the night that I will die, they will wake me in mighty style 3 nights and 3 days. There will be fine clay pipes and kegs that are full, and there will be 3 mountainy women to keen me when I'm laid out, and cut my coffin out for me from the choicest, brightest boards. And if Sean Hines is in Weenish, let it be made by his hand. Let my cap and my ribbon be inside in it, and be placed stylishly on my head, and Big Paudine will take me to Weenish, for rough will be the day. And as I go west by Inchichaniv, let the flag be on the mast. Oh, do not bury me in Lettercalla, for it's not where my people are, but bring me west to Meenish, to the place where I will be mourned aloud. The lights will be on the dunes, and I will not be lonely there. David, I wonder if you have any concluding thoughts, one who's working so much with the dead, any thoughts on your work or advice for the living?
Well, if you do happen to come to Sligo visiting and you do happen to pass away on tonight, remember Foley and McGowan. You'll get the best care. You'll get the best passage. We'll send you off on a surfboard if you have to. So.
It's been an honour chatting to you. Thanks so much for your time and thanks for all the work you do. So thanks, David.
Yep. You're welcome.
I've got